Millionaire marries ugly woman to pay off a massive debt. Everyone believed her face was disfigured. But when she took off the veil, everyone was shocked by what they saw. Caleb Anderson stood in his luxurious Manhattan office, staring out at the skyline he once believed was his kingdom. The golden hues of the setting sun reflected off the glass buildings, but all he could see was the looming shadow of his impending downfall. His empire, the one he had meticulously built with ruthless ambition, was crumbling beneath his feet. The numbers didn't lie. His company, Anderson Global, was on the brink of collapse. Years of dominance in the investment world had made him invincible, or so he thought. But now, the reality was suffocating. The financial reports on his desk confirmed his worst fears. Debts piling up, investors pulling out, and stocks plummeting faster than he could control. And the worst part, he had been betrayed. His longtime business partner, William Harrington, had played him like a fool. While Caleb had been busy expanding their empire, William had been methodically siphoning money, shifting assets, and preparing for the moment to strike. That moment had come today, when Caleb received a call from his lawyers, informing him that William had filed lawsuits, frozen key assets, and turned board members against him. Rage coursed through Caleb's veins as he clenched his fists. How had he not seen this coming? He prided himself on being steps ahead of everyone, a shark in a sea of weaker men. But now, he was drowning. A sharp knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. James Reynolds, his personal attorney, walked in, his expression grave. "We're out of options, Caleb," James said, placing a folder on the desk. "Unless we find a massive cash infusion immediately, Anderson Global will be completely bankrupt within weeks." Caleb exhaled sharply, running a hand through his dark hair. "And who the hell is going to invest in a sinking ship?" James hesitated before replying. "Actually, someone already made an offer." Caleb narrowed his eyes. "Who?" James swallowed. "Raymond Carter." The name sent a jolt through Caleb's body. Raymond Carter wasn't just rich. He was powerful. The man had built a financial empire that made even Anderson Global look small in comparison. But more than that, he was known for his cunning and ruthlessness. If Raymond Carter was offering help, it wouldn't come without a price. Caleb sat down, rubbing his temples. What does he want? James hesitated again. Not your company, he wants you. Caleb's eyes snapped up. What the hell does that mean? James opened the folder and slid a contract across the desk. Carter is willing to cover all your debts. Inject capital into Anderson Global and restore your position in the market. In exchange, you have to marry his daughter, Alyssa Carter. Silence filled the room. Caleb stared at the words on the contract, his mind trying to process the insanity of the situation. A marriage to a woman he had never met. He let out a humorless chuckle. This has to be a joke. James shook his head. It's not. Carter wants a public, legally binding marriage. No prenup, no loopholes. He's not just offering you a lifeline. He's buying you. Caleb scoffed, pushing the contract away. And why the hell would I agree to that? James hesitated. Because if you don't, you'll lose everything. Caleb exhaled, leaning back in his chair. He knew James was right. The alternative was bankruptcy, disgrace, and complete ruin. But marrying a woman he didn't even know, that was insanity. Then again, hadn't he made ruthless deals before? Wasn't his entire empire built on strategic alliances? Who is she? Caleb asked, his voice quieter now. Alyssa Carter. James shifted uncomfortably. That's complicated. Caleb arched a brow. How so? James hesitated. No one really knows much about her. She's never been seen in public, the rumors say. Well, that she's severely disfigured. That's why Carter keeps her hidden away. Caleb frowned. Disfigured? James nodded. Some say she was in an accident. Others claim she was born that way. Either way, Carter has kept her completely isolated. A strange feeling settled in Caleb's chest. Was this why Carter was so eager to marry her off? Was he trying to get rid of her? The thought made Caleb's stomach tighten. He had always controlled his own fate. He was the predator, never the prey. But now, he was being cornered. He looked at the contract again, his mind racing. Could he really do this? Could he sell himself in exchange for his empire? He closed his eyes for a moment, picturing his company burning to the ground. Picturing William Harrington winning. No, he wouldn't let that happen. Caleb opened his eyes, determination hardening his gaze. He grabbed a pen, exhaled sharply, and signed his name at the bottom of the contract. "Tell Carter," he said, his voice steady. "He has a deal." James nodded solemnly, picking up the contract. "The wedding is in 3 days." Caleb didn't flinch. He had made his choice. There was no turning back now. As James left the office, Caleb remained seated, staring out at the city he had fought so hard to conquer. The sun had set, leaving behind a darkness that mirrored the uncertainty ahead. He had just sealed his fate, and he had no idea what awaited him on the other side. Caleb barely slept that night. The moment he had signed that contract, he had felt the weight of his decision settle on his shoulders like a mountain. He had made impossible choices before, cutting off failing business partners, outmaneuvering rivals, playing the ruthless game of power. But this was different. He wasn't just selling shares or assets, he was selling himself. As the morning light filtered through his penthouse windows, he sat at his desk, nursing a glass of whiskey he hadn't even realized he had poured. His mind was a battlefield, torn between the sheer absurdity of the situation and the cold, logical reality. This was his only way out. Anderson Global wouldn't survive another week. His employees, his legacy, everything he had built would be gone if he didn't follow through. A sharp knock at the door snapped him out of his thoughts. He straightened his posture, schooling his expression into one of control. "Come in." James entered, looking as exhausted as Caleb felt. "Carter has set the meeting for this afternoon. He wants you at his estate by 3. Caleb let out a slow breath. "Any more information on Alyssa?" James shook his head. "She's a complete mystery. No photos, no public appearances, no social media. It's like she doesn't exist outside of Carter's mansion." That unsettled Caleb more than he cared to admit. He wasn't the kind of man who liked unknown variables. If he was walking into this deal, he needed to know everything. By the time the car pulled up in front of the Carter estate, Caleb was composed, his mind clear. The mansion was an architectural marvel. Massive gates, manicured gardens, a driveway that stretched for what seemed like miles. Money wasn't just spent here, it was displayed. As he stepped out, a butler in a pristine suit greeted him with a bow. "Mr. Anderson, Mr. Carter is expecting you." The interior was just as extravagant as he had imagined. Dark wood paneling, chandeliers that cost more than some companies, an air of old money power. Caleb had been in plenty of wealthy homes, but this one felt different. It was almost suffocating. Raymond Carter sat in a grand study, his presence commanding even as he remained seated behind a massive oak desk. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly groomed, his suit impeccable. He looked like a man who never lost. "Caleb," Raymond greeted, his voice smooth, controlled. "I trust you've had time to consider my proposal. I wouldn't be here if I hadn't." Caleb kept his tone equally steady, refusing to show any sign of discomfort. "I just have one question. Why me?" Raymond leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "Because I need a man who understands power. A man who won't crumble when faced with adversity, Alyssa. She needs a husband who won't see her as a burden." The words were carefully chosen. But Caleb wasn't stupid. "You mean she needs someone willing to ignore whatever condition she has?" Raymond's lips curled into something that might have been a smirk. "Exactly." Caleb exhaled slowly. "So is she sick? Deformed?" Raymond's expression didn't change. "That's for you to find out. But rest assured, my daughter is of no physical burden to you." The cryptic response only made Caleb more suspicious. Every instinct screamed that there was more to this than Raymond was letting on. A door at the far end of the study creaked open, and Caleb turned just in time to see a figure in white step into the room. Alyssa. His breath caught for a fraction of a second. She was covered. A long-sleeved, elegant dress draped over her frame, and a veil cascaded from her head, obscuring her completely. Only her hands were visible, delicate fingers curled together nervously. She didn't speak, didn't even lift her head. Raymond stood, gesturing toward her. "Alyssa, this is Caleb Anderson, your future husband." Caleb took a step forward, studying her carefully. Why was she hiding? "Alyssa?" Raymond prompted, his tone a warning. Slowly she raised her head, but the veil remained in place when she finally spoke. Her voice was soft, almost uncertain. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Anderson." Something about the way she said it made Caleb pause. There was no fear, no disgust, just resignation. Raymond's gaze flickered between them. "We'll hold the ceremony in 3 days. Everything has already been arranged." Caleb's jaw tightened. "That fast?" "There's no reason to delay," Raymond said smoothly. "You both understand what's at stake." Alyssa said nothing. Caleb exhaled through his nose. He hated being manipulated, and yet here he was, walking into a deal he had no control over. But he had made his choice. His gaze settled on Alyssa again. "What are you hiding?" Raymond clapped his hands together, breaking the silence. "That settles it then, Caleb. My staff will handle the legal details. I suggest you take the next few days to prepare." Caleb didn't move. His eyes locked onto Alyssa's concealed face. He had spent years reading people, understanding their weaknesses before they even realized them themselves. And yet, he couldn't read her. For the first time in a long time, uncertainty crept into his mind. 3 days. In 3 days, he would marry a woman he knew nothing about, and something told him he was about to step into a world of secrets far darker than he had ever imagined. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur. Caleb barely had time to process the absurdity of the situation before he found himself trapped in the whirlwind of preparations orchestrated by Raymond Carter's team. Everything had been arranged down to the smallest detail, without his input, of course. The venue, the guest list, even the suit he was supposed to wear had been chosen for him. It was as if he were just another piece in Raymond's carefully constructed game. The media had caught wind of the arrangement, and speculation ran wild. Why was the once powerful Caleb Anderson marrying a woman no one had ever seen? Tabloids painted the event as a desperate move by a fallen businessman, while others focused on the mystery surrounding Alyssa Carter. Rumors about her alleged disfigurement resurfaced, growing more outlandish with each passing day. But the public's curiosity was nothing compared to Caleb's own. He still hadn't seen Alyssa's face. Every interaction they had in the past 3 days had been brief, formal, and always with that damn veil between them. She spoke little, and when she did, there was something in her voice, a quiet acceptance that unsettled him. Now, standing at the front of an opulent ballroom, he adjusted the cuffs of his tuxedo and took a steady breath. Hundreds of eyes were on him, waiting for the scandalous spectacle to unfold. The wedding was being held in a lavish estate just outside of New York, the kind of venue reserved for royalty and the ultra-elite. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, their golden glow illuminating the sea of high society guests who whispered behind champagne glasses. He could feel their stares. Some were curious, others pitiful, but most were entertained. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a public execution of his reputation. The grand doors at the back of the room swung open, and a hush fell over the crowd. Alyssa Carter entered, draped in an ethereal white gown. She moved with a quiet grace that contradicted every ugly rumor whispered about her. But just as before, she was hidden. A veil, thick, opaque, and suffocating, covered her face entirely. The effect was unsettling. Alyssa's steps were steady as she walked down the aisle, her delicate hands clutching a bouquet of deep crimson roses. Caleb kept his expression unreadable, but his heart pounded against his ribs. He had agreed to this deal. He had prepared for this. So why did he feel like the ground was shifting beneath him? When she reached him, she lifted her head slightly, and though he couldn't see her face, he could feel her eyes on him through the fabric. The priest cleared his throat and began the ceremony. Caleb barely listened. His mind was stuck on one thought. Why was she still hiding? Raymond stood off to the side, his presence like a shadow looming over them. He knew the truth. He had known all along, and whatever it was, he had built this entire spectacle around it. The moment arrived. "You may lift the veil," the priest announced. Silence blanketed the room. Caleb hesitated, his fingers grazing the delicate fabric. He could feel the weight of 100 gazes, the breathless anticipation of an audience eager for scandal. And then, he lifted it. Gasps rippled through the room. A few whispered expletives. Someone dropped a glass, the sound shattering through the silence. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. Alyssa Carter was stunning. There was nothing wrong with her. No scars, no deformities, no grotesque disfigurement as the rumors had claimed. Instead, she had soft, elegant features, full lips, and eyes that held an intelligence far sharper than her father's games would suggest. Her dark hair framed her face in soft waves, and her skin glowed under the chandelier light. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, Caleb felt completely off balance. What the hell was going on? He had expected a monster, a woman hidden from the world for reasons beyond her control. Instead, he was staring at someone who had been kept hidden deliberately. He turned slightly, his gaze flicking to Raymond. The man's expression was perfectly composed, but Caleb could see it now. Control. This had never been about Alyssa's appearance. It had been about keeping her locked away. Alyssa's lips barely moved as she whispered, "Now you understand?" Caleb did. He just didn't know why. The ceremony continued, but the words barely registered in his mind. He went through the motions, repeating vows that felt hollow, slipping a ring onto the finger of a woman he had grossly underestimated. When the priest finally declared them husband and wife, Alyssa did not hesitate. She turned to him, tilted her chin up slightly, and kissed him. The crowd erupted in murmurs, some in shock, others intrigued, but Caleb barely noticed. He was too focused on the fire behind her actions. Alyssa wasn't meek. She wasn't afraid, and she wasn't here by choice. This was a woman who had been controlled her entire life. And now, she was about to change the game. As they turned to face the guests, the whispers around them grew louder. The entire high society of Manhattan had just witnessed something far more scandalous than an arranged marriage. They had witnessed a secret unraveling before their very eyes. Caleb felt Alyssa's fingers tighten briefly around his before she released him. She turned, poised and unreadable, as if she hadn't just set fire to every assumption that had been made about her. Raymond, standing at the front row, smiled as if everything was still under control, but Caleb knew better. His entire world had just shifted, and for the first time in a long time, he had no idea what was coming next. The reception was an elaborate display of wealth and power, just as Caleb had expected. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the opulent ballroom, where Manhattan's elite feasted on gourmet delicacies and clinked glasses filled with aged champagne. The orchestra played a melody that felt almost ironic, a romantic facade draped over what had just been exposed as a carefully orchestrated deception. Caleb sat at the head of the long banquet table, Alyssa beside him, her posture perfectly poised, her expression unreadable. Across from them, Raymond Carter entertained guests, his laughter smooth and practiced. He was a man who had never lost control, and even now, after the spectacle at the altar, he acted as if everything had gone exactly as planned. Caleb swirled the whiskey in his glass, his thoughts tangled in the storm raging inside him. Alyssa was a puzzle he hadn't even begun to unravel. She had sat through the ceremony like a willing participant, had kissed him with a confidence that had sent a message to the entire room. She wasn't afraid. She had known all along that he would expect a monster beneath that veil, and yet, she had let him believe the lie. Why? Leaning slightly toward her, he murmured under his breath, "You could have said something before the wedding." She lifted her champagne flute without looking at him. "Would you have believed me?" Caleb exhaled sharply. "Fair point. Why the secrecy?" he pressed. "Why let the world think you were some kind of hidden disgrace?" Alyssa finally turned to him, her dark eyes holding a sharpness he hadn't noticed before. "Because that's the narrative my father needed to control me." Her voice was calm, but beneath it, there was something cold, something heavy with years of silence and unspoken truths. Caleb studied her carefully, and you played along. A bitter smile touched her lips. "I didn't have a choice." Something about the way she said it made his stomach tighten. Before he could push further, Raymond rose from his seat, drawing the attention of the room. The conversation around them quieted as the powerful businessman lifted his glass, his voice carrying with the authority of a man used to being listened to. "To my daughter Alyssa and her new husband Caleb Anderson," Raymond said smoothly, his eyes gleaming under the lights. "A union that will ensure prosperity for generations to come." A polite round of applause followed, though Caleb could hear the hushed murmurs that never truly ceased. He forced a smile, raising his glass in acknowledgement, but the tension between his shoulders remained. Raymond's words were carefully chosen. He wasn't just celebrating their marriage, he was staking his claim on it. Caleb was no fool. This wasn't about family or legacy, this was about power, and Raymond Carter was making sure everyone in the room knew that, despite everything, he was still the one pulling the strings, as the guests resumed their conversations. Alyssa leaned in ever so slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father doesn't lose, Caleb. And if you think you're in control of your own life, you're mistaken." Caleb chuckled under his breath, though there was no humor in it. "I don't play to lose either, sweetheart." She turned her head slightly, just enough for her gaze to lock onto his. There was something unreadable there, something that sent a strange shiver through him. "Then be careful," she said, "because in this game, losing isn't just about money." Before he could respond, a man approached their table. A politician Caleb recognized from the news. The man greeted them warmly, his attention focused entirely on Alyssa. "It's been far too long, my dear," he said with a polite smile. "I had no idea you were—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "That you were well." Alyssa's smile was nothing more than a polite mask. "I've been exactly where my father wanted me to be." The man cleared his throat. Clearly uncomfortable, he murmured something about catching up later before excusing himself. Caleb leaned back in his chair, watching as Alyssa's fingers tightened ever so slightly around the stem of her glass. People were surprised to see her, not because they expected her to be disfigured, but because they expected her to be gone. Something in his gut twisted. "Alyssa," he said lowly, "where have you been all these years?" She didn't look at him, didn't answer. Instead, she set down her glass and rose gracefully from her chair. "Dance with me." Caleb blinked. "What?" She extended a hand, her expression giving nothing away. "They're all watching. Let's give them something else to talk about." He hesitated, but only for a moment. Then he took her hand, allowing her to lead him to the dance floor. The orchestra swelled, the melody slow and deliberate. Alyssa moved with practiced elegance, her body perfectly in tune with his, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. But beneath the performance, beneath the way her fingers rested lightly against his shoulder, Caleb could feel it. Tension, coiled and restrained. "I asked you a question," he murmured, keeping his expression smooth for the watching crowd. "Where have you been?" Alyssa exhaled softly. "Locked away." His grip on her waist tightened. "What do you mean?" She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw it. Anger, not the fleeting kind, the kind that had been buried for years. "I mean," she said evenly, "that I have spent most of my life behind walls my father built, because keeping me out of sight was the only way to ensure I never found out the truth." Caleb's pulse kicked up. Before he could press further, she smiled. A chillingly perfect smile that belonged to someone who had learned to perform for an audience. "Smile, Caleb," she whispered, tilting her head slightly, as if they were exchanging sweet nothings. "Because tonight is just the beginning." His jaw clenched, but he did as she said, forcing a smirk onto his lips. Because deep down, he knew she was right. This wasn't just a marriage. This was the beginning of something far more dangerous. And the worst part, he had no idea whose side Alyssa Carter was really on. The drive back to the Carter estate was steeped in silence. The reception had finally ended, leaving behind the echoes of murmured speculation and forced pleasantries. Caleb sat beside Alyssa in the back of the limousine, his gaze fixed on the darkened cityscape beyond the tinted windows. She was quiet, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture perfect. Too perfect. He had spent the entire evening watching her, trying to decipher the truth beneath the careful facade she wore like armor. The moment she had stepped onto that dance floor with him, something had shifted. Alyssa Carter was not the woman he had expected, but then again, nothing about this deal had gone as expected. The car pulled up to the estate, the mansion looming like a fortress against the night sky. The grand iron gates opened slowly, the security cameras tracking their every move as they passed through. When the driver opened the door, Alyssa stepped out first, her gown flowing behind her as she made her way up the marble steps without a word. Caleb followed, his mind racing. This was it. Their wedding night. The part where they were supposed to act like newlyweds. But there was no romance in this. No soft whispers or stolen glances. Only tension. Inside, the mansion was eerily quiet. The staff had disappeared, leaving the halls empty. It felt deliberate. Caleb loosened his tie as he watched Alyssa ascend the grand staircase, her footsteps unhurried, as if she wasn't walking toward the man she had just married, as if she had already made peace with whatever was coming next. She stopped at the top, glancing over her shoulder. "Are you coming?" Caleb exhaled, then followed. The bedroom was just as extravagant as the rest of the mansion. High ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. A bed big enough for 4 people. But all Caleb could focus on was Alyssa as she stood by the window, her fingers trailing over the sheer curtains. She didn't look at him when she spoke. "Are you expecting something from me tonight?" Caleb leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "That depends. Are you planning to tell me the truth? Or do I have to keep peeling back the layers myself?" A small smile touched her lips, but it wasn't amused. "And what truth is it that you're looking for?" "Caleb." He pushed off the frame, stepping closer. "Let's start with the fact that your father spent years making the world believe you were some kind of disfigured recluse, that you played along with it, and that, despite all of that, you don't seem surprised that I know something bigger is going on here." Alyssa finally turned to him, her dark eyes holding a sharpness he hadn't noticed before. "What exactly do you think is happening?" "I think," Caleb said slowly, "that you're not nearly as controlled as your father would like you to be." Something flickered in her eyes. Acknowledgement. Caleb took another step, his voice lower now. "You said earlier that you were locked away, that your father kept you out of sight so you wouldn't find out the truth." He tilted his head. "What truth, Alyssa?" She let out a slow breath, and for the first time that night, he saw hesitation. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she whispered, "He didn't want me to know that I'm the key to his destruction." Caleb's pulse quickened. Before he could respond, she reached up, unfastening the delicate clasp of her necklace. He hadn't paid much attention to it before, but now, as she turned the pendant over in her palm, he saw what it was. A key. Small, silver, and old. Alyssa met his gaze. "He thinks I don't know what it opens." Caleb stared at the key, then back at her. "And do you?" Alyssa gave a small, knowing smile. "I do now." Caleb exhaled, stepping even closer, his voice steady. "You're talking about evidence, aren't you?" She nodded slowly. "My father is powerful, but no empire survives without its cracks. And my father, he has a vault, a place where he keeps the things that could ruin him. He's always assumed I didn't know about it." She rolled the key between her fingers. "But I do." Caleb narrowed his eyes. "You think whatever's in that vault can take him down?" "I know it can." Her voice was firm now, her certainty unwavering. "My father made sure I was never seen, never spoken about, never a part of society. But he underestimated me, Caleb." Caleb smirked slightly. "You don't strike me as the type to sit quietly in a cage." Her lips twitched. "No, and neither do you." There was something electric in the air between them now, an understanding, a shift in the dynamic that had been forced upon them. Caleb had walked into this marriage expecting a business transaction, a way to save his empire, even if it meant sacrificing his freedom. But what he had actually walked into was something far bigger. Raymond Carter wasn't just a controlling father. He was hiding something that could destroy him. Alyssa turned, stepping closer to Caleb now. The distance between them was almost non-existent. She looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you in?" Caleb studied her carefully. He had built his career by reading people, by knowing when someone was bluffing. But Alyssa, she wasn't bluffing, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something unexpected. Excitement. "I'm in," he murmured. Alyssa nodded, slipping the key back beneath her gown. "Then we start tonight." Caleb leaned against the cold marble counter in the suite's private bathroom, his mind spinning. The dim lighting cast shadows across his face, making the hard lines of his jaw appear even sharper. He had agreed. He had made the choice. And now, there was no turning back. Alyssa Carter wasn't just some sheltered daughter of a billionaire. She was a weapon, one her father had kept locked away for years, hoping she'd never discover her own power. But she had. And now, she wanted revenge. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. The logical part of him knew this was dangerous. Taking down Raymond Carter wasn't just about ruining a man. It was about dismantling an empire. Caleb had spent years in high society, rubbing shoulders with men who controlled industries, governments, entire economies, and Raymond Carter was among the most untouchable of them all. But Caleb had never been afraid of a fight. When he stepped back into the bedroom, Alyssa was sitting on the edge of the massive bed, her hands delicately folded in her lap. She looked composed, regal even, but Caleb saw it now, the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers pressed against the silk of her nightgown. She wasn't afraid, but she wasn't unaffected either. He sat in the armchair across from her, resting an ankle over his knee. "You said we start tonight. What exactly does that mean?" Alyssa's dark eyes met his, unwavering. "It means I show you what my father has hidden." There was no hesitation in her voice, no second guessing. Caleb exhaled through his nose. "And where exactly is this vault?" She tilted her head slightly, studying him as if weighing how much she should trust him. Then, finally she spoke. "His private study. It's reinforced, soundproofed, accessible only by biometric security. His thumbprint, his voice, and a physical key." Caleb arched a brow. "And let me guess, you have the key, but not the rest." A small smile curved her lips. "That's where you come in." He let out a low chuckle. "You want me to crack your father's security?" Alyssa didn't blink. "I want you to be my distraction." Caleb leaned forward slightly, intrigued. "Keep talking." She stood, walking toward the grand window that overlooked the sprawling estate. "My father is a creature of habit. Every night, after an event, he retreats to his study to drink his usual glass of bourbon and review the day's security reports. He'll expect nothing to be out of place." She turned to face Caleb. "We use that window." His brows furrowed slightly. "He won't suspect anything." "He never does," she murmured. "He trusts his system too much. And he trusts that I—" She hesitated. "Will always do as I'm told." Caleb folded his arms, watching her closely. He could hear the bitterness beneath her carefully controlled tone. "And how do you plan to get his thumbprint?" Alyssa's lips curled slightly. "He drinks bourbon from the same crystal glass every night. I switch it out before the staff collects it." Caleb let out a low hum of approval. "Smart?" She shrugged. "It's not enough. His voice authentication requires a live command. It won't just work with a recording. That's the difficult part." Caleb smirked. "Not necessarily." Alyssa's brow lifted slightly. "I know how to override voice command locks," he explained. "It takes the right frequency and a bit of technical finesse. The thumbprint is harder, but if we can get a clean lift from the glass, I can create a temporary mold." Alyssa studied him carefully. "So you are more than just a businessman." Caleb smirked. "Let's just say I've learned a few things along the way." She nodded, then turned her gaze toward the door. "We don't have much time. He'll be in his study within the hour. If we miss this window, we'll have to wait another night." Caleb pushed himself up from the chair, rolling his sleeves to his elbows. "Then let's not waste time." Alyssa didn't hesitate. She moved swiftly, leading him down the dimly lit hallway toward a back stairwell. The house was eerily silent, the distant hum of security cameras the only sound. When they reached the lower level, she gestured toward a sideboard where an empty bourbon glass sat. Carefully, she picked it up with a silk napkin and handed it to him. Caleb examined it under the low lighting, smirking slightly. "Perfect. Follow me," Alyssa whispered. They navigated the corridors in silence, moving through the grand mansion like shadows. Every now and then, she would pause, listening for movement, before signaling for him to continue. When they reached the study doors, she exhaled softly. "We only have a few minutes." Caleb nodded. "Watch the hall. I'll handle the rest." She stepped back, keeping an eye on their surroundings while he pulled a small case from his pocket, a personal tool he carried for situations exactly like this. He worked quickly, pressing the glass against a silicone mold, extracting the fingerprint. It wasn't perfect, but it would do. Alyssa turned her head slightly. "Hurry." With precision, Caleb placed the thin mold over his thumb and pressed it to the biometric scanner beside the door. A soft beep followed. The light turned green. Alyssa's breath caught. Caleb smirked. "Shall we?" he whispered, pushing the door open. The study was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the city lights filtering through the window. The room smelled of aged whiskey and leather-bound secrets. Alyssa moved with purpose. Making her way to the grand bookshelf that lined the back wall, she ran her fingers along the spines of the books before pressing a hidden panel. A soft click echoed in the silence, and a small compartment slid open. Inside, a small metallic safe gleamed under the moonlight. Alyssa turned to Caleb, her breath steady. "Now we find out the truth," Caleb met her gaze, the weight of the moment settling over them. Whatever was inside that safe, it had the power to bring Raymond Carter to his knees, and they were just about to unlock it. Alyssa's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the small metallic safe, her breath controlled but shallow. The weight of years, of secrets, of isolation, of being nothing more than a pawn in her father's empire, hung between her and whatever was inside. Caleb, standing beside her, watched intently, his body coiled like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. He had spent his life reading situations, analyzing risks. Right now, the air in the room was thick with the kind of tension that came just before something irreversibly changed. Alyssa inserted the key into the lock, turning it slowly. The safe let out a low metallic click, and she exhaled, pressing her lips together. Caleb stepped closer. "Ready." She hesitated for half a second before nodding. Then, with one smooth motion, she pulled the door open. Inside, stacks of documents sat in neat piles, bound by thin leather straps. A few USB drives were tucked inside small velvet pouches, and at the very bottom, there was something that made Caleb's breath still for a moment. A gun. Alyssa ignored the weapon, reaching for the topmost file. She pulled it out and flipped it open, her eyes scanning the pages rapidly. The further she read, the more her expression hardened, the color draining from her face. Caleb grabbed another file, flipping through the papers. It didn't take long for him to understand what he was looking at. Offshore accounts, illegal transactions, blackmail, names, powerful names. "This is it," Alyssa whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Caleb nodded, his fingers tightening around the document in his hand. "Your father isn't just rich. He's controlling people in ways that go far beyond business." She turned another page. Swallowing hard, he's been using his influence to bury people. Competitors, politicians, even his own allies. Her hands clenched. Some of these people, they just disappeared. Caleb narrowed his eyes. This wasn't just corporate fraud. This was something far darker. Alyssa pulled out one of the USB drives and held it up. "Whatever's in here is even worse. My father isn't reckless. If he kept this, it means it's leverage over someone powerful." Caleb's mind raced. He had always known Raymond Carter was a ruthless businessman. But this was something else entirely. This wasn't just about protecting an empire. It was about holding power through fear. Alyssa looked at him, her jaw tight. "We can't let him keep this." Caleb exhaled. "No, we can't." She started stacking the files, ready to take them. But Caleb grabbed her wrist. "Wait." She shot him an impatient look. "What?" "We can't just take everything. If he notices it's missing, he'll know it was you. And trust me, Alyssa, your father doesn't seem like the kind of man who lets betrayal slide." A flicker of something, fear, crossed her face, but she quickly masked it. "Then what do you suggest?" Caleb scanned the room, thinking fast. "We take copies, not the originals. If we empty the safe, he'll know exactly what's gone. But if we leave everything intact, he'll have no idea what we know, or what we're planning." Alyssa hesitated, then nodded. "You're right." She reached into her dress pocket, pulling out a small, slim scanner. Caleb arched a brow. "You came prepared," he murmured. Alyssa didn't look at him as she carefully placed the first set of documents into the scanner. "I've been waiting for this moment my whole life." Caleb smirked slightly but said nothing. Instead, he focused on listening for any sounds outside the room. The mansion was eerily silent, but he knew better than to trust that. Raymond Carter was the kind of man who always had eyes everywhere. The scanning took time. Too much time. Every second felt stretched. Every movement too loud. When Alyssa finished the last file, she tucked the scanner away and placed the papers back exactly as they had been. She glanced at the USB drives, considering, but Caleb shook his head. "Not those," he murmured. "We don't know if they're encrypted. If we take one and it suddenly stops transmitting data, he'll know." Alyssa clenched her jaw but relented, carefully placing everything back in its rightful place. When she closed the safe, she hesitated. Then, before Caleb could ask, she reached for the gun. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist. "What are you doing?" She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Taking precautions." Caleb's jaw tightened. If you take that, this stops being just a game of information. If he finds it missing, he won't suspect theft. He'll expect war." Alyssa stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she set the weapon back down. They closed the compartment, making sure everything looked untouched. Alyssa adjusted the books, then turned to Caleb. "We need to get out of here," she whispered. They moved swiftly, retracing their steps through the mansion's corridors. Caleb's pulse was steady, his mind calculating the next moves. They had what they needed. For now, as they reached the staircase, Alyssa suddenly stopped. Caleb nearly collided with her. "What?" Then he saw it. A figure stood at the end of the hallway. Raymond Carter. His face was unreadable, his posture relaxed. Too relaxed. The kind of calm that made Caleb's instincts scream danger. The air in the mansion shifted, the weight of something unseen pressing down on them. Raymond's voice was smooth, amused. "Couldn't sleep, my dear." Alyssa exhaled slowly, then turned fully to face him. "Just clearing my head." Raymond's gaze flicked briefly to Caleb before returning to his daughter. "And Mr. Anderson?" Caleb forced a smirk, his heartbeat even. "Making sure my wife doesn't get lost in this maze of a house." Raymond smiled, but there was nothing warm about it. It was the kind of smile a man gave when he knew he was already winning. "Of course," he said smoothly. "You wouldn't want to lose your way, would you?" Alyssa's nails dug into her palms, but her voice was steady. "Never." Raymond tilted his head slightly. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he stepped aside. "Then by all means go back to bed. Tomorrow is a big day." Caleb didn't move at first. Neither did Alyssa. But then, as if they were nothing more than obedient players in his game, they walked past Raymond, heading back toward the suite. The moment the door closed behind them, Alyssa let out a sharp breath. Caleb didn't hesitate. "He knows," she nodded, her face pale. "He knows." And just like that, the war had begun. Alyssa paced the suite, her bare feet silent against the polished wood floor. The air was thick with tension, her every movement sharp, controlled, calculated. Caleb leaned against the edge of the bed, watching her. He could see the wheels turning in her head, the quiet panic beneath her composed exterior. Raymond knew. He didn't have proof yet, but he suspected. And a man like Raymond Carter didn't need proof to act. Caleb had dealt with ruthless men before, but none of them compared to this. The way Raymond had stood there, the way he had spoken with that infuriating calm. It wasn't just suspicion, it was a warning. Alyssa stopped suddenly, turning to face Caleb. "We have to move faster." He arched a brow. "I thought the plan was to be careful, to make sure he doesn't suspect we took anything." She shook her head, her fingers tightening into fists at her sides. "That plan is dead. He knows something is wrong. If we wait, he'll close in. We need to strike before he does." Caleb exhaled slowly, tilting his head as he studied her. There was fear in her eyes, but not in the way most people feared Raymond Carter. This wasn't about what he could do. It was about what she had spent her entire life trying to escape. "You think he'll lock you away again?" Caleb said, his voice quieter now, her jaw clenched. "I know he will." Caleb ran a hand through his hair. Considering, they had scanned the documents, but they hadn't seen what was on the USBs. The vault had held more than just blackmail material. It had held leverage. And Alyssa was right. If they didn't move quickly, Raymond would find a way to bury them before they could use it. "All right," Caleb said finally. "What's our next move?" Alyssa took a breath, regaining her composure. "We get out of this house. We take the files somewhere safe, and then we find out exactly what we have." Caleb smirked. "Running away already? I thought you were stronger than that." Alyssa's gaze hardened. "This isn't running. It's tactical retreat. And unless you have a better idea, I suggest you keep up." Caleb chuckled under his breath. He liked this side of her. The fire, the determination. "Fine," he said. "But we can't just walk out the front door. Your father isn't stupid. He'll have people watching." Alyssa nodded. "That's why we don't leave the usual way." She turned, grabbing a sleek black coat from the chair and tossing it to Caleb before slipping into one herself. Then, without another word, she moved to the far end of the room, where a large window overlooked the gardens. Caleb frowned. "You're kidding." Alyssa glanced at him. I grew up in this house. I know every weak point in its security. There's a blind spot in the back garden. No cameras, no guards. We get to the service road, steal a car, and we're gone before he even realizes we left. Caleb let out a low laugh. You're full of surprises, princess. She didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she unlocked the window, pushing it open. A cool gust of night air rushed in. Below them, the dark garden stretched toward the tree line. It was a long drop, but there was a ledge just beneath the window. Alyssa climbed onto the windowsill with the ease of someone who had done this before. Caleb followed, muttering under his breath, "You're a billionaire's daughter, and you sneak out of windows like a damn teenager." She didn't look back as she stepped onto the narrow ledge, keeping her balance effortlessly. "You think I stayed locked away all those years without finding my own way out?" Caleb smirked. He had to admit, he was impressed. They moved quickly, slipping down onto the trellis, then dropping into the soft grass below. The air was sharp with the scent of damp earth, the distant glow of the estate's security lights casting long shadows. They stayed low, moving toward the outer wall. Caleb's pulse was steady, his mind clear. This was what he did best. Adapting, finding a way to win. Alyssa led them through the garden, navigating the twists and turns with practiced ease. When they reached the back gate, she stopped, pressing a hand against the cold iron bars. "It's unlocked," Caleb asked, surprised. She smirked. "Like I said, weak points." They slipped through the gate, emerging onto a narrow service road. A single black SUV was parked nearby. Alyssa wasted no time. She walked to the driver's side, pulled something from her pocket, and bent down near the door handle. Caleb crossed his arms, watching as she worked. "Let me guess, you're also good at stealing cars." Alyssa didn't look up. "I prefer the term borrowing." A second later, the lock clicked open. Caleb climbed into the passenger seat as Alyssa started the engine. The headlights remained off as they rolled down the empty road, the mansion fading behind them. For the first time that night, Caleb felt a shift. They weren't just reacting anymore. They were moving forward. Alyssa's hands were tight around the steering wheel as she drove, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. Caleb watched her carefully. She wasn't just determined. She was done being controlled. "So," he said after a moment, "where exactly are we going?" Alyssa kept her eyes on the road. "Somewhere safe." Caleb smirked. "And let me guess, your father has no idea it exists." Her lips curled slightly. "Not yet." Caleb leaned back in his seat, exhaling slowly. They had the information. They had a plan. And for the first time, they had the upper hand. But as the city lights grew closer, he knew one thing for certain. Raymond Carter wouldn't let them go that easily. And when he came for them, they had better be ready. Alyssa drove with precision, her fingers gripping the steering wheel as the city lights grew closer. The night was silent except for the hum of the engine and the faint rhythm of Caleb's fingers tapping against his knee. The tension between them was thick, not with uncertainty, but with the sheer weight of what they had just done. They weren't just running from Raymond Carter. They had declared war on him. Caleb had spent years negotiating deals with powerful men, but he knew this wasn't business. This was personal. Raymond had built an empire on fear and control, and now his own daughter had slipped through his fingers, taking with her the one thing that could bring it all crumbling down. Caleb had to admit. He liked the irony. "How much farther?" he asked, breaking the silence. Alyssa kept her eyes on the road. 15 minutes. Caleb glanced at the GPS on the dashboard. They were heading toward an industrial district, far from the luxury of Manhattan. He raised an eyebrow. "Didn't take you for the warehouse type." Alyssa's lips twitched. "That's because you don't know me." Caleb smirked. "I'm learning." She didn't respond, but he caught the briefest flicker of amusement in her expression, before it disappeared beneath the weight of the night. They pulled off the main road, weaving through empty streets lined with abandoned buildings and forgotten factories. The air smelled of rust and rain, and the distant hum of the city felt miles away. Alyssa finally turned down a narrow alley, stopping in front of a nondescript metal garage door. Without a word, she stepped out of the car and moved to a keypad hidden behind a loose panel on the wall. Caleb followed, watching as she typed in a code. A soft beep sounded, and the door began to rise, revealing a dimly lit interior. The space inside was nothing like he expected. It wasn't some damp, crumbling hideout. It was organized. A sleek workstation with multiple monitors sat against one wall, a stocked bar and kitchenette against another. A black leather couch and a few scattered chairs gave the place an almost lived-in feel. Caleb turned to her. "So, you've had this set up for a while." Alyssa tossed the car keys onto the counter, pulling off her coat. "I prepared for the day I'd have to leave, I just didn't expect it to be tonight." Caleb chuckled. "You always have a backup plan." She met his gaze. "Always." He nodded, impressed. He had underestimated her. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because of the way her father had kept her hidden, or because of how she had let him believe the rumors. But Alyssa wasn't a damsel in distress. She was a strategist, and he respected that. She walked over to the workstation, plugging in the USB drive they had taken from the vault. The screen flickered to life, lines of encrypted data scrolling across the monitor. Caleb leaned against the counter, watching. "You can crack it?" he asked. Alyssa smirked. "Give me a few minutes." He folded his arms, waiting as she worked, the glow of the screen reflected in her eyes, her focus unshakable. Caleb had spent his life surrounded by powerful people, but Alyssa Carter was something else entirely. She wasn't just wealthy, she was dangerous. In the best way possible, after a few minutes of silence, she let out a breath. "Got it." Caleb pushed off the counter, stepping closer as she pulled up a set of video files. The first one was grainy, time-stamped from years ago. Alyssa clicked play. The screen flickered, and suddenly, there he was, Raymond Carter, sitting in a darkened room, speaking with a man whose face was partially obscured. Caleb's gut tightened. He recognized that man. "That's Senator Harris," he muttered. Alyssa's fingers curled into fists. "And that," she whispered, "is my father buying a senator." The conversation on the screen was damning. Harris was visibly anxious, his voice tense as he spoke. "I can't make this disappear without repercussions," the senator said. Raymond's response was chilling. "You misunderstand, Senator. You don't make it disappear. You replace it with something worse, something that ensures you stay in your position. And I get what I want." Caleb exhaled slowly. This wasn't just corruption. This was blackmail on a federal level. Alyssa clicked on another file. This one was newer. More names, more faces. Business moguls, politicians, even law enforcement officials. Each conversation a different version of the same game. Raymond Carter pulling strings, making people disappear, ensuring his empire remained untouchable. Alyssa's hands trembled slightly. All this time, I thought he just wanted power. But this is control on a scale I never imagined. Caleb ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. If this gets out, he's finished. Alyssa nodded. That's the problem. Caleb glanced at her. What do you mean? She turned to face him fully. If my father realizes we have this, he won't just fight back. He'll burn everything down to keep himself in power. He's spent years making sure no one can touch him. If we move the wrong way, we'll be signing our own death warrants. Caleb let out a slow breath. She was right. This wasn't just about exposing Raymond Carter. It was about surviving him. We need a strategy, Alyssa said. We need leverage. If we release this all at once, he'll have time to spin the story, to bury it before it does any real damage. Caleb smirked. So we don't release it all at once. Alyssa's brows lifted slightly. We leak it, he continued. Piece by piece. Let the media get a taste. Just enough to make people start asking questions. Then we hit them with the rest when there's no way to cover it up. Alyssa considered this, then nodded. That could work, but we need protection. Once we start this, we're targets. Caleb's smirk widened. I have a few friends who might be able to help. She arched a brow. Friends? He shrugged. Let's just say I've done a few favors for powerful people and they owe me. Alyssa studied him for a long moment, then exhaled. All right, let's start planning. Caleb glanced at the screen one last time before turning back to her. This is it, Alyssa. Once we start, there's no going back. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. I don't want to go back. For the first time, Caleb realized something. Alyssa Carter wasn't just escaping her father. She was becoming something more, and he was right there with her. The weight of what they had uncovered settled between them like an invisible force. The room was dimly lit by the glow of the computer screen, flickering as the video looped back to the beginning. Caleb exhaled, dragging a hand down his face. They weren't just sitting on blackmail material. They were holding a loaded gun pointed at the head of one of the most powerful men in the country. Alyssa leaned back in her chair, her fingers still resting on the keyboard, though she had stopped typing minutes ago. Her face was unreadable, but Caleb had spent enough time watching her to recognize the storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. "You all right?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral. She hesitated, then shook her head slightly. "I always knew my father was ruthless, but I never thought..." Her voice trailed off as she stared at the paused video of Raymond Carter making a deal that had likely ruined lives. "You never thought he was capable of this?" Caleb finished for her. Alyssa's jaw tightened. "I was naive," Caleb scoffed. "No, you were controlled." He leaned against the edge of the table, his arms crossed. "He spent your entire life making sure you never had enough power to question him. That's not naivety. That's conditioning." Alyssa exhaled through her nose. "And now," Caleb smirked. "Now, he's made a mistake. He let you out." For the first time that night, something flickered in her eyes. Determination. Sharper than before. She turned back to the screen. "We have to be smart about this. My father has people everywhere. He won't go down without a fight." Caleb nodded. "That's why we don't just go after him. We go after the people protecting him, the ones who think they're untouchable." Alyssa studied him. "How?" Caleb pushed off the table, grabbing his phone. "Like I said, I have friends and some of them owe me favors." He scrolled through his contacts. Pausing on a name before pressing call, the line rang twice before a deep, familiar voice answered. "Anderson, didn't think I'd hear from you again." Caleb smirked. "Guess I like surprising people, Hunter." There was a pause on the other end. "What do you need?" Caleb glanced at Alyssa before responding. "A safe way to leak information, and some extra muscle." Hunter chuckled. "Sounds serious. You have no idea." There was another pause before Hunter spoke again. "Send me what you have. I'll make sure it lands in the right hands." Caleb hesitated. He didn't trust easily, but Hunter was one of the few people in his past who had never stabbed him in the back. Alyssa watched him carefully as he nodded. "I'll send the first piece, but this has to be controlled. If it all comes out at once, Carter will bury it before it can do real damage." "Understood. I'll be in touch." The call ended, and Caleb turned back to Alyssa. "First step done. Now we wait for the fire to start." Alyssa exhaled. Standing from her chair, "Waiting isn't an option. My father will make a move the second he realizes something's off. We need to stay ahead." Caleb smirked. "Then let's make sure he stays off balance." They spent the next hour reviewing the files, selecting the first leak, something damaging enough to make headlines, but not enough to give away their full hand. Alyssa carefully sent the encrypted data to Hunter, then shut the laptop. She ran a hand through her hair, her expression momentarily vulnerable. "We should get some rest tomorrow. Everything changes." Caleb watched her for a moment before nodding. "You take the bed. I'll take the couch." Alyssa arched a brow. "Afraid I'll stab you in your sleep." Caleb smirked. Wouldn't be the first time a woman tried. A small laugh escaped her, the first real one of the night. It was brief, but Caleb noticed. She didn't respond, just shook her head and disappeared into the bedroom. Caleb stretched out on the couch, arms behind his head, staring at the ceiling. He knew he should sleep, but his mind wouldn't shut off. Raymond Carter was out there, already moving his pieces, and Caleb knew that when the sun came up, the real war would begin. The next morning, Caleb woke to the sharp buzz of his phone. He sat up instantly, his instincts kicking in before he was fully awake. Alyssa was already up, standing by the window with her arms crossed, watching the city as if waiting for it to burn. He answered the call. "Talk to me." Hunter's voice was clipped. Urgent. It worked. The file hit the press this morning. Carter's already scrambling to contain it, but the media is eating it up. Caleb smirked. "Good. Not so fast," Hunter continued. "Your boy is pissed. He's already calling in favors, shutting down stories, trying to spin it. You and your new wife might want to keep your heads down." Caleb exhaled. He had expected this. Carter wasn't the type to roll over. "We're ready," he said. Hunter hesitated. "Caleb, this isn't just another business deal. Carter kills people who get in his way." Caleb's grip tightened on the phone. "Then he's about to have a real problem." The call ended, and Caleb turned to Alyssa. "Showtime," he murmured. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Then let's make sure we win." For the first time since this had started, Caleb realized something. Alyssa wasn't afraid of her father anymore. She was ready to destroy him. The morning sun barely had time to rise before the first ripple of consequences struck. Alyssa sat on the edge of the couch, her laptop open, fingers moving rapidly across the keys as she scanned the news. Caleb stood by the kitchen counter, sipping coffee, like this was just another morning, but his sharp gaze flickered between her and the screen. He didn't have to read the articles to know what was happening. He could see it in the way her shoulders tensed, in the way she bit the inside of her cheek, a habit she probably didn't even realize she had. "It's working," she murmured. "The media picked it up faster than I thought. Every major outlet is running the story. Some are already connecting it to other missing persons cases." Caleb smirked. "And your father?" Alyssa clicked on another tab, her eyes narrowing. "He's furious. His PR team is scrambling to control the damage. He's already made a statement denying everything, calling it a smear campaign orchestrated by his jealous competitors." She snorted. "Classic deflection." Caleb chuckled, taking another sip of coffee. "Of course, because billionaires never do anything wrong, right?" She didn't smile. Her focus was locked on the screen, scanning through Carter's connections, watching for any sign of retaliation. Caleb knew it was coming. He just didn't know how fast it would hit. A sharp knock at the door made both of them freeze. Alyssa's head snapped up, her fingers stilling over the keyboard. Caleb set his coffee down, moving instinctively toward the side of the door. Out of sight, he glanced at her, lowering his voice. "Expecting someone." Alyssa shook her head. "No one should know we're here." That was all the confirmation he needed. Caleb slid a hand to the back of his waistband, where his concealed gun rested. He had spent years in business, but before that, he had spent years learning how to survive. Another knock. This time, more forceful. "Alyssa Carter, Caleb Anderson. We know you're in there." The voice was male, calm. "Authoritative? Not a cop. Private security?" Caleb exchanged a glance with Alyssa, then nodded toward the back exit. She closed her laptop silently, slipping a USB drive into her pocket before she moved toward the secondary door. Caleb turned back to the main entrance, keeping his voice even. "Sorry, you've got the wrong place." A brief silence, then a heavy thud. "They're trying to break in," Alyssa whispered. Caleb cursed under his breath. They didn't have much time. He moved fast, grabbing Alyssa's wrist and pulling her toward the exit. The second the door opened, cold morning air hit them. But there was no time to adjust. They sprinted down the alleyway behind the building, just as the front door burst open behind them. Heavy boots hit the floor. Voices shouted, "They're running! Back alley!" Caleb didn't hesitate. He pulled Alyssa behind a row of stacked pallets just as bullets ripped through the brick wall beside them. Alyssa barely had time to gasp before Caleb shoved her forward. "Move!" They ran. The alley twisted into another narrow street, leading toward an overpass. Caleb knew they couldn't just keep running. They needed a car. Alyssa glanced back, her breath coming fast. "They'll have more waiting for us." "I know," Caleb muttered. Then he spotted it. A parked delivery van with the driver standing outside, taking a smoke break. Without hesitation, Caleb sprinted toward him, pulling a roll of cash from his pocket. "Hey," he called, his voice low but urgent. "I need your van." The man blinked in confusion, then scoffed. "Not happening." "Buddy?" Caleb shoved the money into his hand. "Now it is." The man hesitated, then glanced at the wad of cash. His resolve crumbled. With a muttered curse, he turned away. "I didn't see anything." Caleb yanked open the door. "Get in." Alyssa didn't hesitate. She jumped into the passenger seat as Caleb slid behind the wheel. Slamming the door shut just as their pursuers turned the corner, the first gunshot shattered the side mirror. "Go!" Alyssa shouted. Caleb floored the gas. The van lurched forward, tires screeching against the pavement. In the rearview mirror, he saw the men running, one of them raising a radio. "They're calling backup," Alyssa warned. "I figured." Caleb turned sharply onto a main road, weaving through early morning traffic. Alyssa pulled out her phone, her fingers moving rapidly. "I need to kill the GPS on this van before they track us." Caleb focused on driving. watching for any sign of black SUVs or unmarked sedans. He knew how these guys worked. They wouldn't stop until they had orders to. Alyssa's breath hitched. "We have a bigger problem." Caleb glanced at her. "What?" She turned the phone screen toward him. A news alert flashed across the top. "Raymond Carter just announced that I've been kidnapped." Caleb's grip tightened on the wheel. "Son of a..." "He's framing you," Alyssa said, her voice tight. "He's making it look like you forced me to run, like you're trying to extort him." Caleb let out a humorless laugh. "Of course he is. He's offering a reward for my return." She swallowed. "A lot of money." Caleb's jaw clenched. This wasn't just about getting away anymore. This was about making sure the whole world knew the truth before it was too late. He pressed harder on the gas. "Then we need to hit back harder." Alyssa nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. "Let's take everything from him." Caleb smirked. "Now you're thinking like me." As the van roared through the city. The real war had just begun. The city blurred past them as Caleb weaved through traffic, pushing the van to its limits. Alyssa's phone screen continued to glow in the dim interior, illuminating the sharp lines of her face. The weight of her father's declaration hung in the air between them. Suffocating in its implications, Raymond Carter had turned them into fugitives. Caleb clenched his jaw, eyes flicking between the road and the rearview mirror. No sign of their pursuers yet. But it wouldn't take long. Carter's men weren't just mercenaries. They were connected, resourceful, and relentless. The second that bounty hit the right ears, they wouldn't just be running from her father's goons. They'd be running from every greedy bastard in the city looking for a payday. Alyssa broke the silence, her voice tight. "We can't keep running like this." Caleb exhaled. "I know." She turned the phone screen toward him again. "The news is everywhere. My father's making it look like you kidnapped me, like I'm some helpless victim who needs rescuing." Her grip tightened. "He's manipulating the entire narrative, turning this into a spectacle." Caleb smirked without humor. "That's what men like him do best. Control the story. Control the outcome." Her eyes darkened. "Not this time." Caleb took a sharp left, the van jerking as he narrowly avoided a collision. "Then we need a new plan. Fast. Because right now, we don't just have Carter's men after us. We have half the damn city watching." Alyssa's mind was already moving, her fingers tapping rapidly against her phone. "We need to make the truth louder than his lies." Caleb shot her a look. "How?" She met his gaze, unwavering. "We go public." Caleb let out a low whistle. "You sure about that? Once we put our faces out there, there's no going back, no hiding, no second chances." Alyssa nodded. Her jaw set. "I don't want to hide. I want to burn his empire down in front of the entire world." Caleb's lips quirked up at the sheer fire in her voice. "Damn, I really do like you." She rolled her eyes but didn't argue. Instead, she pulled up her contacts, scrolling quickly before selecting a name. "I know someone, a journalist, one of the only people in the city who hasn't been bought by my father." Caleb arched a brow. "And you trust them?" Alyssa hesitated. "Not completely. But right now, trust isn't a luxury we have. We just need someone willing to listen." She pressed call. The line rang once, twice. Then a voice answered. "Alyssa." Caleb watched as her shoulders tensed slightly. "Ethan, I need your help." The journalist on the other end let out a slow exhale. "I figured this day would come eventually. Where are you?" Alyssa exchanged a glance with Caleb. "Not safe, and neither will you be if we tell you too much over the phone." Ethan's voice lowered. "You're in deep trouble, aren't you?" Caleb could hear the faint sound of typing on the other end, as if Ethan was already pulling up information. Alyssa's voice remained steady. "If you think the story that dropped this morning is big, you have no idea what we're sitting on. But we need to meet in person. Somewhere private and soon." There was a pause. Then, "I have a place. No cameras, no eyes. I'll text you the location. But Alyssa," his voice hardened, "if you're really going up against your father, you better be ready for the war that's coming." Alyssa's grip on the phone tightened. "I've been ready my whole life." The call ended. A moment later, a text popped up with an address. Caleb read it, nodding. "That's on the west side, a 20-minute drive if we're lucky." Alyssa exhaled, pressing her fingers to her temples. "We won't be lucky." She was right. As they approached a traffic light, Caleb's gaze flickered to the side mirror. His stomach dropped. Black SUV, no plates, damn it. Alyssa? He said evenly. She looked up, following his gaze, the color drained from her face. How long? Caleb checked the rear view. Long enough. The SUV didn't speed up. It didn't cut them off. It simply followed, patient and precise. Alyssa's breathing shallowed. We can't lead them to Ethan. Caleb flexed his fingers over the steering wheel. Then we lose them. He made a sudden right turn onto a narrow side street, cutting into oncoming traffic before swerving back into an open lane. The SUV reacted immediately, accelerating. Alyssa gripped the dashboard. They're not even trying to be subtle anymore. Caleb's jaw clenched. Because they don't have to be. They sped through the city, weaving through streets, cutting through alleys. But the SUV stayed on them, relentless. It wasn't just one car. A second one joined. Another black vehicle, blocking off an escape route. Shit, Caleb muttered. They're boxing us in. Alyssa's mind raced. We need to ditch the van. They have every license plate flagged by now. Caleb's eyes darted around. Up ahead, he spotted a parking structure, multiple levels, multiple exits. He veered sharply toward it, tires screeching as they entered. The tight space gave them a temporary advantage, but not for long. Alyssa glanced behind them. They're still coming. Caleb's hands were steady on the wheel. Then we make them think they caught us. She looked at him sharply. What? He didn't answer. Instead, he slammed on the brakes, skidding the van into an empty space behind a large concrete pillar. He killed the engine, cutting off their lights. The parking garage fell into near silence. Alyssa barely breathed. The SUV's engines rumbled as they entered the structure. Tires squealed as they searched, prowling like wolves in a cage. Caleb leaned closer to her, whispering, On my signal, we run. Fast! Don't stop! Don't look back! Alyssa nodded, her pulse hammering. The SUVs continued patrolling. Seconds stretched like eternity. Then, suddenly, a loud crash. Caleb grabbed her wrist. Now! They bolted. Footsteps, shouts. The men realized too late. The crash had been a distraction. Caleb and Alyssa sprinted toward the opposite exit. Bursting into the cold air. Ahead, a motorcycle, unattended. Caleb didn't hesitate. He yanked Alyssa onto the seat behind him and started the engine. The roar of the bike split the silence as they tore down the street, leaving the parking garage behind. Alyssa clung to him, breathless. That was insane. Caleb grinned, adrenaline pumping. You loved it, she huffed, but didn't deny it. As the city blurred past them, one thought burned in both their minds. They had survived today, but Carter wasn't done with them yet. The cold night air sliced against their skin as the motorcycle roared through the streets, weaving between cars with reckless precision. Alyssa held on to Caleb tightly, her arms wrapped around his torso, her heart pounding against his back. The adrenaline still burned through her veins, but beneath it, there was something colder, the realization of how close they had just come to being caught. She glanced over her shoulder. No black SUVs in sight, but that didn't mean they were safe. Caleb took another sharp turn, leading them off the main road and into an older part of the city, where the streets were narrower, the buildings taller. Finally, he pulled into a dark alley, cutting the engine. The sudden silence was almost deafening. Alyssa swung her leg over and stepped onto the pavement. Exhaling a shaky breath, Caleb stayed on the bike for a moment, watching the entrance of the alley like a predator scanning for threats. She ran a hand through her hair, trying to steady herself. Tell me you have another escape plan. Caleb smirked, but there was no humor in it. I always have a plan. The question is whether we'll live long enough to use it. Alyssa let out a dry laugh, comforting. His eyes softened slightly as he looked at her. You all right? She met his gaze, hesitating. She wasn't. Not really. The reality of what they were doing, the sheer scale of it, was setting in. Her father wasn't just hunting them down. He was shaping the entire narrative against them. If they made one wrong move, the world would believe Caleb was her kidnapper, and she would be dragged right back into the prison her father had built for her. No. She straightened her shoulders, pushing the fear aside. I'll be all right when my father is ruined. Caleb gave her an approving nod. Then let's make sure that happens. He pulled out his phone and checked the address Ethan had sent. The meeting spot isn't far. We walk from here. Alyssa frowned. Won't they still be looking for us? They'll be looking for a motorcycle speeding through the city, not two people walking like they belong here," Caleb said. Tucking the key into his pocket, she exhaled, knowing he was right. It was a risk, but everything they did from now on would be. They moved quickly, slipping through side streets and deserted paths, blending into the shadows. Every sound, every approaching car made Alyssa's skin prickle. Caleb walked close beside her, his presence steady, solid. The meeting place was an abandoned cafe, long since closed, the windows boarded up, the door slightly ajar. Caleb pushed it open first, scanning the interior before stepping inside. Alyssa followed. A single figure waited for them, sitting at a small table in the center of the empty room. Ethan. He looked exactly as Alyssa remembered. Sharp eyes, messy hair, a man who had seen too much and trusted too little. "You're late," he said, setting down a cigarette he hadn't bothered to light. Caleb shrugged. "We had company." Ethan's gaze flickered to Alyssa. "You okay?" She nodded, sitting across from him. "We don't have much time. You saw what my father did today." Ethan's expression darkened. "Yeah, he's got half the city believing you're being held hostage. Your face is everywhere." He pulled out his phone, flipping it toward her. A news article flashed across the screen. Caleb Anderson wanted for kidnapping heiress Alyssa Carter. Beneath it, a photo of her, taken years ago. Innocent, controlled. Exactly how her father wanted the world to see her. Alyssa clenched her fists. "This is why we need you. We have proof. Not just about what he did today. About everything. He's been running this city through blackmail, corruption, and worse." Ethan leaned back, crossing his arms. "All right, show me." Alyssa pulled out the USB drive, sliding it across the table. Ethan picked it up, examining it before plugging it into his laptop. The screen illuminated his face as he scanned the files. His eyes widened slightly. "This is..." He trailed off, scrolling through the evidence. "Damn," Caleb smirked. "Told you it was big." Ethan didn't look up. "You're not just exposing him. You're making him a target for every enemy he's ever had." Alyssa's voice was cold. "Good." Ethan exhaled sharply. "This isn't gonna be easy. Your father has enough pull to shut down stories before they spread. If we don't do this right, he'll bury everything before it gains traction." Caleb leaned in. "That's why we drip-feed the leaks. Let people start asking questions before we give them the full picture." Ethan considered this, nodding slowly. "That could work, but you're on a timer. The longer you stay in the city, the higher the risk." Alyssa exchanged a look with Caleb. They both knew it. "How fast can you get the first wave out?" Caleb asked. Ethan tapped a few keys. "I'll have the first article live by midnight. After that, we watch the fire spread." Alyssa's pulse quickened. This was it, the moment where everything changed. Ethan gave her a hard look. "Once this starts, you can't take it back. You sure you're ready for that?" Alyssa's hands curled into fists. "I've never been more ready." Ethan nodded, slipping the USB into his pocket. "Then get out of here and stay out of sight." Caleb stood first, offering a hand to Alyssa. She took it, steadying herself. As they stepped back into the night, the city suddenly felt heavier. Every shadow a potential threat. Every movement a sign that Carter's reach was everywhere. Caleb squeezed her hand briefly before letting go. "It started." Alyssa's breath hitched. "Now we see how far my father is willing to go." She already knew the answer. As far as it takes. The night air felt colder as Alyssa and Caleb moved swiftly through the city, their bodies tense, their minds running at full speed. The moment they left Ethan behind, they both knew. They were out of time. The first wave of information would be out by midnight. By morning, her father would strike back harder than ever. They needed to disappear. Now, Caleb guided her through the maze of streets. Every turn calculated, every movement deliberate. His hand hovered near his waistband, where his gun was tucked beneath his jacket. Alyssa's pulse drummed in her ears, but she kept up, matching his pace. "Where to?" she asked. Voice low. "We need a place where no one will look for us," Caleb murmured. "And I have just the spot." Alyssa didn't ask questions. She had learned by now. Trust him, follow him, survive. They moved like shadows through the city, slipping through back alleys, cutting across abandoned lots. When they reached a quieter district, Caleb finally slowed, leading her toward a small, unassuming townhouse nestled between two larger buildings. It looked abandoned, because it was meant to. Caleb pulled out a key and unlocked the door, ushering her inside before shutting and bolting it behind them. Alyssa scanned the space. It was bare, minimal, but functional. A safe house. Caleb had planned for this. She turned to him. "How many of these do you have?" Caleb smirked. "Enough," she exhaled, running a hand through her hair as she sat on the edge of the couch. "How long before he moves?" Caleb checked his phone. "Depends. If he's predictable, he'll try to cut the story off before it spreads. If he's desperate, he'll go after us first." Alyssa nodded slowly. "He's desperate." Caleb studied her. "You sure?" She let out a dry laugh. "You don't know my father like I do. He doesn't wait. He doesn't give people time to react. The second he feels a loss of control, he retaliates. Hard." Caleb exhaled, pacing for a moment before sitting across from her. "Then we need to be ahead of him. What's his first move?" Alyssa thought for a moment, closing her eyes. She knew how her father worked. Every decision was calculated, every response precise. Then it hit her. "He'll come for Ethan." Caleb's expression darkened. "You sure?" Alyssa nodded. "Ethan is the biggest risk. If my father can silence him before the story spreads too far, he might be able to contain the damage." Caleb grabbed his phone. "We need to warn him." But before he could dial, the phone vibrated. Both of them froze. Caleb slowly turned the screen toward her. Unknown number. Alyssa's stomach twisted. She already knew. Caleb answered, putting it on speaker. A smooth, calm voice filled the room. "You disappoint me, Alyssa." Her body went cold. Caleb's grip on the phone tightened. "Carter." Her father chuckled softly. "You've been busy, Mr. Anderson, and terribly reckless." Alyssa forced herself to speak. "Let Ethan go." Raymond sighed. "Ah, so you already know. I expected as much, but I'm afraid you're too late." Caleb's jaw clenched. "What did you do?" A pause. Then, a distant, muffled voice. "Alyssa, don't..." Then, a sharp crack, a pained grunt. Silence. Alyssa shot to her feet. "You son of a..." Raymond's voice remained unchanged, calm as ever. "You have something that belongs to me, darling, and you're going to give it back." Alyssa's hands shook with rage. "You can't stop what's already started." Raymond chuckled. "Oh, but I can..." "You see, Alyssa, you're under the very foolish impression that this ends with a scandal. It doesn't. It ends when I say it does." Caleb cut in, his voice ice cold. "If you lay another hand on him, You'll what?" Raymond interrupted smoothly. "Kill me, please. You don't have the stomach for this." "Anderson, but I do." Alyssa's breath was ragged, her body trembling. "What do you want?" There was a pause. Then, her father's voice lowered. "Come home." Caleb's entire body tensed beside her. "Not happening." Raymond ignored him. "Come home, Alyssa. Return what you stole, and I might consider being merciful." Alyssa clenched her fists. "And Ethan..." Silence then. "Don't make me decide for you." The call ended. Alyssa stared at the phone, her pulse pounding, her hands shaking with barely controlled fury. Caleb stood slowly. "We need a plan, now." Alyssa looked up at him, and in that moment, she knew. This was it. Her father had just forced their hand. No more running, no more hiding. This was war. Alyssa stood frozen, her father's voice still echoing in her head. The call had ended, but the weight of his words lingered like a noose tightening around her throat. "Come home. Return what you stole. And I might consider being merciful." Merciful. She clenched her fists so tightly her nails dug into her palms. Her father had never been merciful a day in his life, and now he was holding Ethan as leverage, waiting for her to break. Caleb exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his jaw as he paced the room. His entire posture radiated barely contained fury. "We don't have time," he muttered. "He's making his move now, which means we have to make ours first." Alyssa forced herself to focus, to shove down the emotions threatening to pull her under. "We can't go in blind. We need a way to get Ethan out without playing into his hands." Caleb stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing in thought. "He wants you to walk into his trap." "That's his mistake," she swallowed. "What are you thinking?" Caleb grabbed a chair and sat down in front of her, his expression hard. "We make him believe he's won. You go home, but not as his prisoner. Alyssa tensed, her heartbeat spiking. That's exactly what he wants. Caleb smirked, but it was sharp. Dangerous. No, he wants control. We take that from him. Alyssa exhaled slowly, considering. Walking back into that house was the last thing she wanted, but if they didn't act fast, Ethan wouldn't have time. Her father didn't bluff. He never had. How do we do it? She asked. Caleb leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You give him what he wants, or at least make him think you are. You go back. You act like you're surrendering. Alyssa's stomach turned at the idea, but she didn't interrupt. Caleb continued. While you keep him distracted, I'll be getting Ethan out, and once he's safe, we end this. Alyssa hesitated. End this? How? Caleb's eyes darkened. We take Carter down for good. Silence stretched between them. Alyssa's mind raced. Her father wasn't just dangerous. He was untouchable in ways no ordinary criminal was. He had influence, money, power. They could destroy his reputation, expose his crimes. But if they didn't cripple his ability to retaliate, none of it would matter. He'll see through it, she whispered. He knows me. He'll know I'm lying. Caleb shook his head. Not if you play it right. Alyssa took a slow, steadying breath. Could she do this? Could she walk back into that house, look her father in the eyes, and pretend to be the obedient daughter one last time? The thought made her skin crawl, but Ethan was running out of time. She met Caleb's gaze. How do I sell it? Caleb studied her, his expression unreadable for a long moment. Then finally he spoke. You do exactly what he expects. You let him think he's broken you. Alyssa swallowed hard. I don't like this. Neither do I, Caleb admitted. But we don't have a better choice. Alyssa's hands trembled slightly, but she nodded. Fine, but I need something in return. Caleb arched a brow. What? She straightened her spine, steel in her voice. If we do this, we don't just save Ethan. We make sure my father never comes after any of us again. Caleb's smirk returned, sharp as a blade. Now you're thinking like me. Alyssa rolled her eyes. God help me. Caleb chuckled, standing. Get some rest. We'll make the call in the morning. Alyssa didn't argue. She lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, sleep a distant thought. Tomorrow, she would walk back into her father's world. Tomorrow, she would become the pawn he thought he still controlled. But when the game was over, she would make sure he never played again. Morning came faster than she wanted. The sky was still streaked with the last remnants of night when Caleb handed her a phone. Alyssa stared at it for a long moment before finally dialing the number she had spent her life answering with dread. The call rang twice. Then, Alyssa. Her father's voice sent a shiver down her spine. She inhaled sharply, forcing her tone to tremble. I don't want to run anymore. Silence. Then, a satisfied hum. You finally come to your senses. Alyssa closed her eyes. I'll come home. Another pause. Then, his voice, slow and deliberate. Smart girl. She tightened her grip on the phone. But I want Ethan. Raymond chuckled. Oh, Alyssa, still making demands. Her throat felt tight. Please. He exhaled, amused. Come home and we'll talk. The line went dead. Alyssa lowered the phone, her hands trembling. Caleb's expression was unreadable. You good, she exhaled. Let's end this. Hours later, she stood at the gates of the Carter estate, the imposing mansion looming before her like a monument to everything she had once feared. The guards let her in without hesitation. As she stepped inside, the air was thick with expensive cologne and quiet menace. Her father was waiting in the grand sitting room, standing beside a glass of bourbon. As if this were just another business meeting, he smiled when he saw her. There you are, my dear. Alyssa forced herself to lower her gaze, to shrink just enough. I don't want to fight anymore. Her father studied her, and for the first time, his smile softened, just slightly. Good girl. She felt sick. He gestured toward a chair. Sit. She obeyed. A servant appeared a moment later, placing a steaming cup of tea in front of her. She didn't touch it. Raymond sipped his drink, watching her with quiet satisfaction. Now, let's discuss what happens next. Alyssa swallowed. Where's Ethan? Raymond smirked. Patience, Alyssa. Her stomach churned. She needed to keep him talking. needed to buy time for Caleb to move, so she did the one thing she never thought she'd be able to do. She played the role her father had spent a lifetime crafting for her. Obedient, weak, she just had to make sure she didn't lose herself in the act. Because when the time came, she would remind her father of the one lesson he had never been prepared to learn. She wasn't his puppet anymore. Alyssa sat perfectly still, her hands resting lightly in her lap, her posture poised, controlled, exactly how her father had trained her to be. The weight of his gaze was suffocating, but she held firm, keeping her breathing even, her expression carefully blank. Raymond Carter took another slow sip of his bourbon, watching her over the rim of his glass, as if waiting for her to break. "I must say," he mused, "I expected you to hold out a little longer. I thought you had more fight in you." Alyssa lowered her gaze, pretending to shrink under his words. I don't want to run anymore," her father hummed, pleased. "Of course not. You were never meant to run, Alyssa. You were meant to be here, with me, where you belong." Every muscle in her body screamed at her to lash out, to wipe that smug expression off his face. But she forced herself to stay in control. Caleb needed time. She folded her hands together. "You said we could talk about Ethan." Raymond tilted his head slightly, as if amused by her insistence. "Why does he matter so much to you?" Alyssa didn't hesitate. "Because I know you, Father. I know how you punish people who get in your way." Raymond smirked. "Oh, Alyssa, you make it sound so cruel." She clenched her fists under the table. "Is he alive?" Her father chuckled, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "For now." Alyssa swallowed the anger rising in her throat. "Then let him go. I came back. You won." Raymond leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I'll admit, I was tempted to make an example of him, but I suppose now that you've returned, I can be merciful." She fought the urge to flinch. A small gesture from her father, and one of his guards stepped out of the room. A moment later, the door opened again, and Ethan was dragged inside. His face was bruised, his lips split, but he was alive. His tired eyes locked onto Alyssa's, a mixture of relief and frustration flashing across his face. "You shouldn't have come back," he muttered. Alyssa forced a tremulous smile. "It's okay now." Ethan shot a sharp look at Raymond, his jaw tight. "If you think she's staying here, you're—" "Enough," her father interrupted smoothly. "Ethan will be released, as a gesture of good faith." Alyssa stiffened. This was too easy. Raymond never let things go without a cost. Her father smiled, but there was something predatory beneath it. "But I expect something in return." Alyssa's heartbeat pounded. "What do you want?" Raymond placed his glass down, leaning forward slightly. "The files, Alyssa. The ones you and your little friend here stole from me. You think you can ruin me, expose me. You forget. I own this city. You think a few documents will change that?" Alyssa forced herself to tremble slightly, to let the uncertainty show. I don't have them." Raymond's smile didn't waver, but his voice dropped to something colder. "Don't lie to me." Alyssa swallowed hard, lowering her gaze. "They're not with me. I can get them. But I need time." Raymond considered this, then nodded as if she had just confirmed something he already knew. "Very well," he said. "You have 12 hours. Bring me everything, and we can put this unpleasantness behind us. Fail, and—" He gestured lazily toward Ethan. "Well, I won't be so generous next time." Alyssa met Ethan's gaze briefly, giving him the smallest nod before shifting back to her father. "I understand." Raymond's smile widened. "Good girl." The words made her skin crawl. The guards released Ethan, shoving him toward the door. Alyssa watched as he hesitated, looking like he wanted to say something, to stop her from staying, but she gave him a sharp look. "Leave now." Ethan clenched his jaw but nodded. A second later, he was gone. Raymond stood, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. "Now, let's have dinner, shall we? It's been far too long since we've eaten together as a family." Alyssa forced a smile. "Of course." But inside, her blood burned. Raymond thought he had won. He had no idea what was coming. Outside, Caleb was already waiting. The second Ethan was shoved out of the house, Caleb pulled him into the car. "She's still inside," Ethan snapped. "We have to—" "I know." Caleb cut him off, his hands tight on the wheel as he pulled away from the Carter estate. She's buying us time. Ethan's face was set with frustration. You're just going to let her walk back into that house. Caleb's jaw clenched. She's not in there to surrender. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Then what the hell is she doing? Caleb's grip on the wheel tightened. She's destroying him from the inside. Inside the Carter estate, Alyssa sat across from her father at the long dining table, her hands resting lightly on her lap, just like she had been taught. Raymond sipped his wine, glancing at her with approval. This is how it should have always been, my dear. You and I, working together, securing our family's legacy. Alyssa smiled softly. Of course, father. And under the table, in the pocket of her dress, she pressed the small button on the hidden transmitter. Caleb would receive the signal any second now. Raymond Carter had spent his life controlling everything, manipulating everyone. But tonight, his entire empire was about to crumble from the inside. And Alyssa, she would be the one to burn it to the ground.